What would you say was the biggest obstacle you had in your career as women, and how do you think they could be addressed?
Okay, I have to think now. I mean, actually, I did several very different things in my life. I'm by education a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, and I was briefly working at university, so I had some sort of an idea to pursue an academic career, which was then somehow stopped by actually a new financial situation in Austria. Let's put it that way. But actually, I could have pursued it, but then I decided maybe not so exciting. Then I worked for the European Commission for a long time during the enlargement process of the European Union in Slovenia. These were the very good times of the European Union. When, you had all sorts of, how should I say, social prestige by being just, I was not I was just a contract agent. So, we have this hierarchy, of course, within the institution. And there, I have to say, it became clear at the age of 35 around that the careers of my male colleagues and my female colleagues, they somehow, they became further apart. Yeah, so all the men really went up the career ladder, and the women more or less had to decide if they want to set up a family and or not, or pursue a career. But there the cost would be quite high, and there I decided very consciously not to stay within the system, go out. I then started my own little business. I actually produced cookies, so I did something completely different. Because it would have cost me too much. I would have had to invest so much time and so much energy into something which was not clear what would come out, that I said, I'm leaving the system, and I went into the private business. And there I have to say, this is much more gender blind. You have a product, you want to sell it, the other side decides, I'm interested or not, is the price okay? This is more... I would say, it's tough, but it's gender blind or gender blinder. And then later, I decided I'm going back into international sphere and then politics, which was more or less a coincidence. I took over a party in Austria, a liberal party, which was kicked out of all institutions in the year 1999. So they tried to get back in 2008. It didn't succeed, so it was more or less completely destroyed. What do you do with such a party? You hand it over to a woman. Because how big are the chances that something would come out of it? It's really, it's a big risk. It's not very rewarded. I took it on and I was successful, but it was, of course, with a great... share of luck as well. So what were the obstacles? The obstacles are always the same. You are in competition with highly educated people around you, and of course very ambitious personalities. And as such, everybody fights with whatever is available. And so it's not a pony farm. It's rather a pond of sharks. But I think this is true for male and female. And, you also have to be fair, and I say this to my female colleagues, that at the end of the day, what we do not learn so much as women, I'm speaking now as an Austrian girl who was raised in the Austrian mountains. Maybe this is not true for other countries, but we are not really raised so competitively as girls. Boys are raised more competitively. They also learn quite early that losing out or, going into a fight and losing is not such a big deal. We are more trained to be nice and to be loved and, to be somehow, you need a lot more comfort, I would say. And if you then go into a world where this is not the rule, you suffer a bit more. I would say this is maybe the basis of also some sort of misunderstanding somehow. So, when I say we have to fight for what we believe in, this also means you have to be prepared to lose out from time to time. In the end, you will win, but, sometimes it's a bit painful. I hope I answered your question.
It's difficult to pick one thing, but I think an interest in women's issues and feminism can be a big obstacle. Just thinking back to an interview at the Foreign Office in the UK when they asked me, what my area of research was, and when I talked about women's issues, that definitely did not go down very well. It goes down much better here at the Parliament, I have to say.
Thank you very much. Yeah?
I'll just have a reflection in terms of how similar, if we think about political careers, academic careers, or in whatever sector women are trying to establish a career, there's many steps in that process. It has to do with personal expressions of ambition. And in terms of political ambition, as Rose pointed out, there's quite an early divide in terms of girls' and boys' expressions of political ambition. And then you get to the stage of recruitment, and if political parties aren't out there recruiting women, and other sorts of recruiters are not focusing on making sure that women are given the same access to those jobs, whether they're political or in some other sector, in academia, for example, it is going to be a problem. And when women are confronted with either images in the media which portray politics or academia or science as not gender-friendly, I think that makes a big difference. And women will come to see it, girls will come to see it as a part of society that is not open to them, is not friendly to them. And I think one of the things that helps overcome that obstacle is to have strong role models, and those can be simply that women are visible in the media or represented in great numbers in institutions or in professions, but also that there are mentors who can mentor women, and those mentors can be men or women who are mentoring young women into careers in which they are underrepresented. So I think I just wanted to share that, and Maria might also reflect on what it's like to do gender politics in academia.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you raised. I was lucky enough to actually apply for a position that was for gender and politics. These positions, there aren't many of them around. There's also differences in terms of, for example, we have in Newcastle politics, 1/3 of the student body are women. I'm teaching gender campaigns and media module where 85% of my students are female. So it's very difficult also to, in a way, reach out to the young male audience, which is something that we would like to do, obviously. And I think there's Susan made a very good point about having role models, and in this sense, I've been very lucky. I used to be Susan's PhD student, and our research areas in this sense have continued to be very linked to one another. But I think it's very important to have these female role models in whatever area of profession we're talking about.
Well, I think I'm quite lucky, despite coming from Italy, which is not exactly the role model country in terms of gender equality. I've been very lucky throughout my professional life. I never particularly felt discriminated because I'm a woman. But it is true that I happen to be very often at conferences, workshops, where there were maybe 1, 2, 3 other women, and there still are a number of areas in academia where women are underrepresented. And I think that is still a problem, and it has to do with what Susan was reflecting on, creating an environment where women feel like they can express their potential at their best.
I see 2 hands raised.
And my question I would address to Maria, to that extent to all participants of the study, that you came up with very curious results. And I was wondering, in terms of methodology, whether you were using, how did you count or what were your measurements tools, whether you in counting and let's say assessing media coverage, whether you took into consideration national and international sources, and whether you did count the same way positive and negative media coverage. That would be interesting to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this question. So we focused on national newspapers in all member states that were included in the study. In each member state, we picked 2 broadsheet newspapers, one more from the left, one more from the right, and 1 tabloid newspaper. The aim was to pick newspapers with the highest circulation. And in each case, we looked at the news content 3 weeks running up to the European Parliament election. So pretty much the month of May, from 1st of May until the 24th of May. And we were coding in each country case. For each news story, we were looking whether a candidate was mentioned. And then when the candidate was mentioned, we tried to find ways in which they were mentioned. For example, whether there was positive or negative evaluation is something that we haven't yet analyzed and don't have the data presented here. But also, for example, whether references were made to their family or a picture. So that's, I hope that answers your question of the methodology. Thank you. Do you want to add? And the papers are if they want further information. There's also further information. There's some working papers and presented already published research at the back there too. A few copies on their articles on women's news media coverage back in 2009, but also on the selection of women to viable electoral list positions. And your paper was on...
Oh, yeah, there's just a number of papers out there in the back that you can get that describe the methodology, or email us and we can send copies. Thanks.
Thank you. Here.
I have a more general question, maybe a point to make, to put the whole discussion into the context of a general disenchantment with the politics, for example. So in the context in which people do not care about male politics, because so far we had male politics, right? To what extent there is a space where women can take up, capitalize on that and build something new? So is there any kind of women type of politics, or should women become like men to actually reach there? Because we have the impression sometimes in the media, a woman that becomes and achieves something, it is portrayed as like a man. So is that something that we should hope for, or we should strive for more female kind of politics? Thank you.
Good question. Who is taking the micro?
Okay, actually, there are 2 questions, I understand. The first question, is an old one. The issue of do women have a different style of conducting politics? And then there's always the argument of Margaret Thatcher, usually, or Indira Gandhi, or, Golda Meir. There are not so many female politicians that we would all be aware of. And then the argument is always, well, they all went to war. So there is no difference in how you conduct politics. My argument then is usually, okay, even if you take empressness, what was the female word of emperor? Maria Theresia, she had all sorts of wars. That there are not so many female big leaders, and of course, we all know them and we are all aware of it. So, if you would have more, I think you would also have different role models. Having said this, I don't think there is something like female politics as such. This is just my personal opinion, and I don't think that I would be so different. Of course, I would never be able to prove it if I would be a man. This is one thing. The other point that you raised is a relatively new development, I would say. But, of course, we all feel it, the disenchantment with politics as such. If this is a possibility for women to step in, I would say you have 2 effects. One is something I would then also ask maybe the academia to reply to my idea. You have something like a feminization of different jobs, which is always negative. A typical example is the judicial area, where you have judges in certain countries, especially the former Soviet, or let's say the former communist countries, where you basically have, 80-90% female judges, with the effect that the salary goes down, that the reputation goes down, and so on. In my country or in our areas, the typical effect is, for example, with teachers. Where you basically, the profession of teachers is more or less female. So if we will have the effect that we will have such a high number of female politicians, and we are far from it, don't worry, I think you would have the effect of feminization, and this is not something that will be very positive. This is also why I'm really deeply convinced that a good mix in whatever profession you have of both genders is, or if you diversify as much as possible, is always the most positive one. Disenchantment, yes, but I don't see yet the result in a complete change of gender towards women, and I also don't think it would be positive.
Thank you. You want to add something, or yes?
I would just follow up on that, because I think it's a very interesting observation, and I think it speaks to your experience, too, of becoming the leader of a party that was marginalized, and that women are often seen as either saviors of lost causes, or they're put in situations where parties are failing, or even corporations are failing, and expected to revive them, or they have to take the blame for their continued failures. So I think the idea that women bring a special experience to the political arena is maybe not perhaps the most important point of why women participate in politics, but it's about the issues that are addressed, giving voice to different ideas, making sure that all issues are expressed and given a chance to be placed on the agenda. That's what's important about women's political voice in the arena, not so much about feminizing or that women practice politics in a particular way. But we all should pay attention to this anti-politics mood which we are experiencing. And that's not just a problem for women, that's a problem for all of us to pay attention to. And I note that women's political movements come and go on the agenda. We had, at the end of January, a women's march that started in the U.S. and spread globally. And I wonder, where is that now? Why did that so quickly move off the agenda? And what was clear from that march and how it spread globally was that so many issues are women's issues. It's not just about reproductive rights, it's about economic rights, all of that can mobilize women. But after that, I just question, where did that movement go? Why are we not now still talking about that march? It very quickly moved off the agenda. If anybody else has an idea about or has a different impression, that would be great to hear. But I just wonder what happened to that. Anyone have an answer?
Another question, please.
And actually, I would like to add, to comment something for the further thinking about. I was also interested in that matter, and I spoke with, not during European Parliament elections, but lately when we had some party elections within a country. And I'm very close with a few politicians who were running for the presidency of the party, and they were obliging. They said, look, we cannot get the media attention and the media coverage. And then I spoke with the journalists, and you know what they said? They said they are not serious candidates. We do not perceive them as serious candidates. Then it goes back actually to the self-positioning and self-marketing and self-branding, and it is something very close to what Ms. Mlinar said. It is a competitive world, and you have to find a way how to be competitive in that sea full of sharks. And then I would, on that line, go a little bit further about this role modeling. I completely agree with all of you that role modeling is very important, but what if we do not have enough role models? And actually my generation do not have enough of role models, but hopefully the next generation, the generation which is going out from the universities now will have. But I think that actually we should start much more earlier in the school and with the stereotypes and everything, you know what I'm thinking about. But for nowadays generation, it is still a role model thing, but we have to find the strength within us and to find a way how to position ourselves in that very competitive world. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If I could just respond to the point you made about candidates not being considered serious by the news media, a point that I didn't make during the presentation, but what we've also found in other research is that the media bias we see in gender differences in coverage, to a large extent comes from political parties. What we see is that the news media cover viable, highly viable candidates. And when we compare men and women candidates' coverage only amongst the viable candidates, we see fewer gender differences in the news media coverage, meaning that the reason why media cover women so little partly is to do with political parties placing them in non-viable electoral list positions.
Thank you. And I have here a last question from Jacques.
Just two things. Thanks very much for all, above all. So I just wanted to say that to everybody, if they want to receive the presentation and the scientist note, you can send a mail to Jesus or to our public opinion monitoring, and we will have a big pleasure to send you. And second thing, because as you know, Jesus, we need to do our own publicity because people don't do. Here you have the last version of it's the review of European and national elections that you can find in the page of MAPS. Thanks, Mr. Vice President, to refer to that. And in the page 36. You can see that in 1979 the percentages was 16.34%, and today is 37.28%. I don't know if it's a good thing, but it's a progression, but not 50%. It is clear. So,
okay.
MEPS pages.
We are reaching in a certain way. So, panelists, thank you very much for your interventions, your interesting discussion, and let's hope next year we can increase these numbers. Thank you very much, and happy International Day tomorrow. Thank you.